And one of the things he did, thinking that this was so good, is he heard about the followers that Jesus had. And he would pursue these people. He would chase after them. And he'd persecute them. And at times, he would order their deaths. All in the name of doing a good deed. All in the name of doing something that he thought was righteous. And he really lived what all of us would look at and see as a terrible life. He looked upon people as they stoned a man with joy. He held the coats of those who stoned somebody who was a Christ follower. And he looked at these men with joy, and he was glad that they murdered and bludgeoned a man with rocks. And that wasn't it. He wasn't satisfied in that. He went and pursued many other people just like that, and would drag them out into the streets. And he'd say, deny the name of Christ, or you'll be beat, and we will kick you out of the city. You see, this man Paul lived a pretty terrible life. And some of you may think, a guy like that, I'm not like that guy. I'm not as terrible, as vengeful, or hateful as he is. So with this man Paul, as he was going to pursue more Christians to persecute, he was met by Christ. He was met by Christ, and Christ stopped him and said, Saul, why do you persecute me? And changed him. He changed him. This man who hated everything that Christ stood for. Everything that Christ spoke, he hated it with a passion. So much that he would put to death anyone that would follow the man Jesus. And he was changed. And there was something that Paul said. There's something that Paul said later on in his life. Is he said, a trustworthy statement, a statement that's worthy of all acceptance by all mankind, is that Christ came to save sinners, of whom I am the worst. And I tell you this, it's really easy to look at somebody who's a murderer. He was a murderer, a cold-blooded murderer. And not only was he so far on that side, he was the most self-righteous man that anybody could know in that day. He thought he was so good. He thought he lived such a perfect life that God had to accept him because he was so good. He kept all the laws. He did everything that God would require. So not only was he completely self-righteous, but completely a murderer on all accounts. But God saw fit to look upon a man like that and save him. And I tell you this, the thing that he said that is a trustworthy statement is that Christ came to save sinners. He said, of whom I am the worst. And some of you hear what I'm saying, and you're just like, yeah, I'm not like that guy. I'm not a terrible sinner like he is. Or maybe some of you are thinking, oh, I'm not self-righteous like he is. You are. We are, because you may not have looked upon somebody's death with approval, but we've had such hatred in our hearts that we wished others were dead, and God says you might as well have committed murder. All of us guys, many of us in our minds, when we look at women with lust, we're like rapists. Looking at them, taking them in our minds, and God says you might as well have done it because you've committed that crime in your heart. He says it's not just the hands and that which comes out of our body that defiles us, but it's that which is in our heart. Our hearts are just as wicked as Paul's. Or we will play a song. We're going to play a song. Trust me. But the beauty of this is, what Paul's statement is this. I don't care if you think that you are so righteous, that you've done all these good things, that God could possibly not cast you into hell. Or if you think that you're so terrible, that you've done so much, that God could not possibly look upon you with favor. Paul's an example of a man just like that. And I tell you what, I stand here today an example of that as well. I'm self-righteous on all accounts. And you know what? I've had such hatred that I've wished many people, anyone that got in my way, I wish they were dead. I'm guilty of those same crimes, as are you all. But God sees fit. He says a trustworthy statement is this, that Christ came to save sinners, of which we all qualify. And that is a trustworthy statement that you can take and trust with full assurance that God is willing to receive sinners, whether you be self-righteous or whether you be so terrible as to be a murderer, a reviler, a liar, a thief, whatever, what have you. Every manner of sin deserves death, but God says, instead of death, I will offer you life by the death of my Son. So I tell you this, come and believe. Don't come and change. Don't come and try and do a good work. Don't try and clean yourself up. Come and believe that God is willing to forgive sinners. You need bring no offering. You need not to fix up your life or change anything. He will do that work. He saved the sinner like Paul, who was self-righteous and a murderer in the flesh. And in that moment, he offered him grace, and he will offer you that same grace if you only would come to him. He does not put out anyone who's come to him. He receives all who come. So thank you guys for listening. This next song is called Majesty and Misery.